To what degree can societal norms manufacture predictable outcomes of behavior? Laypersons may not have the knowledge or the concern to make statements based only on empirical facts, many of which may still be in dispute. Ultimately, laypersons turn to one another for consensual rather than empirical verification. Discursively established consensus provides laypersons predictions as well as controls over their own as well as other people's behavior. Informal public opinion formation generates influence. Influence is transformed into communicative power through the channels of political elections, and communicative power is again transformed into administrative power through legislation. This influence, carried forward by communicative power, gives law its legitimacy, and thereby provides the political power of the state its binding force. A New York advertising executive using depth techniques contended that if advertising men were given entire free rein, they could swing the outcome of any election, with appeals geared towards the undecided or listless mass. His agency had made a test during the 1952 presidential campaign with the I don't know voters, using the same projection techniques used to spot for affinities for brand name images to get voters underlining emotional tone. After the vote, it called back upon the people who had been probed, all of them professedly undecided at the time of the test, and the testers found it had been 97% accurate in predicting how each undecided voter would ultimately vote. The spokesman for the agency stated that the undecided voter is not the thoughtful independent he is often pictured or portrays himself. The depth approach to politics seemed justified by the growing evidence that voters could not be depended upon to be rational. There seemed to be a strong illogical or non-logical element to their behavior, both individually and in the masses. To what degree are the warrants, or basic fundamental notions that establish the social realm susceptible to persuasion? Murray Chotiner, the Los Angeles lawyer who groomed Richard Nixon, had as his basic technique to present the public with two images: the good guy, his guy, and the bad guy, the opponent. In his speech to the 48th chairman, he spoke of the use of and defense against smear. He also spoke about the technique of creating the appearance of public demand, and the technique of winning people's hearts with carefully simulated candor. Richard H. Rover, political essayist for The New Yorker and Harper's, stated in his book Affairs of State, The Eisenhower Years, that Richard Nixon appears to be a politician with an advertising man's approach to his work. Policies are products to be sold to the public. This one today, that one tomorrow, depending on the discounts and state of the market. John Steinbeck stated in the Saturday Review, when making a reference to the particular time politicians were posting broadcast spots during television shows, that the most efficient time was just after the program had ended, because at that point the viewer is less likely to turn the channel, knowing all programs just ended and there are commercials on all channels. That the audience has been amused and half hypnotized. And for this time, it's very valuable for you to have X millions of viewers in a will-less, helpless state, unable to resist any suggestion offered. Roslier Reeves, who conceived of the TV barrage that allowed the grand old party, the GOP, to take the Nixon election, summed up his strategy in these words: "I think of a man in a voting booth who hesitates between two levers, as if he were pausing between two competing brands of toothpaste in a drugstore. The brand name that has made the greatest penetration on his brain will win the choice." As the decade of the 50s was beginning, a portent of things to come appeared in the New York World Telegram describing the 1950 congressional campaign. The article explained that the politicians are beginning to apply all the smart advertising techniques used by mass production America to merchandise automobiles, bath salts, and lawnmowers. A leading Democrat, William Benton, former co-head of the advertising agency Benton and Balls, ran a successful campaign for the Senate using mass merchandising techniques. He explained, "The problem is to protect yourself as a person. To solve this issue, they used 1-minute radio spots that were pre-evaluated for crowd appeal, and comic strip ads pre-tested for reader intensity." By the 1952 presidential election, professional persuasion had made its way into the inner council of at least one party. Stanley Keller Jr. of Brookings Institute made a study of the 1952 campaign, which he reported in his book Professional Public Relations and Political Power. The campaign reveals some interesting differences in the place occupied by professional publicists in the councils of their opposing parties. The strategy, treatment of issues, use of media, budgeting, and placing of the Eisenhower campaign showed the persuasive influence of professional propagandists. The Democrats used fewer professionals, were less apt to draw upon commercial and industrial public relations experience in their thinking, and their publicity men apparently had less of a voice in the policy decisions of the campaign. The Democrats, of course, took a shellacking and, Kelly suggested, had learned their lesson and would make greater use of public relations and advertising men in 1956. The depth probers also were turning their attention to politics. During the 1952 presidential campaign, Dr. Ditcher announced that all the long-winded talking about such issues as inflation and Korea would actually have very little to do with the outcome of the election. He stated the crux of the campaign was the emotional pull exercised by the rival candidates. By the 1956 election, both parties had become deeply involved in the use of professional persuaders. In the 1956 Nation's Business, which is published by the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, happily heralded the new businessman's approach to politics. It proclaimed both parties will merchandise their candidates and issues by the same methods that business has adopted to sell merchandise. These will include scientific selection of appeals, planned repetition, corps of volunteers will ring doorbells and telephones, radio spots, announcements, and ads will repeat phrases with a planned intensity. Billboards will push slogans of proven power. Candidates need, in addition to rich voice and diction, to be able to look sincerely at the camera. One of the main jobs of the advertiser is guilt. In this conflict of pleasure and guilt is not so much to sell the product as to give moral permission to have fun without guilt. Dr. Ernest Ditcher, President for the Institute of Motivational Research. Social Research Incorporated made a thorough depth study of 350 smokers using a battery of psychiatric, and other probing techniques. They found Americans smoke to prove they are people of a virile nature. They see smoking as proving vigor and potency. A report claimed this is a psychological satisfaction sufficient to overcome health fears, to withstand moral censure, ridicule, or even the paradoxical weakness of enslavement to habit.